Right, so what we get in chapter 3 and chapter 4 of Hard Times is the moment where the young Gradgrind children are looking in at the circus and Gradgrind is horrified at what they're doing. And we also meet Mr. Bounderby, okay, and Dickens gives us real insight into life with the Gradgrind at this point. He's really setting up this family sort of dynamic. And right at the top of chapter 3 on page 14, we're told that at the school Gradgrind intended every child in it to be a model, just as young Gradgrinds were all models. And I think that sums up why this section where we find out about the Gradgrind life is important. Dickens is making the point that at the Gradgrind school, you know, all the children are brought up to be like items on a conveyor belt, all the same. But his own children are brought up in exactly the same way. So Dickens is using the Gradgrind family home as a microcosm. This represents all the issues with society on the whole, and he's doing it through the Gradgrind family life. We're told about the description of where they live on page 15, and it's about 5 lines down. It's a great square house with a heavy portico darkening the principal windows as its master's heavy brows overshadowed his eyes. So the house is the same as Gradgrind, the description is the same, it's set up in exactly the same way. The point being basically that these facts have sort of invaded the space really, that they're polluted by the ideas of utilitarianism, and everything that's wrong with this system is happening to the young Gradgrind children. We see towards the bottom of page 15, about 10 lines from the bottom, that Gradgrind would describe himself as an eminently practical father. And I think Dickens is deliberately juxtaposing those two ideas, a father and the idea of love and protection and care, with eminently practical. In this system there's no room for affection or anything that a father should be. And again what we've got is this economic system of utilitarianism invading the Gradgrind home and invading the family relationships and eventually sort of pulling them down. When Gradgrind sees his two children looking at the circus, we're told what happens. We're about 8 lines down on page 17. We're told indeed Thomas did not look at him but gave himself up to be taken home like a machine. So clearly Thomas Gradgrind has been invaded by the system. He is just like this machine, this object on the conveyor belt. And that sets up how throughout the novel really he's just at the behest of everybody else. He just does what the people want. Harthouse very easily manipulates him. You know, it's so easy to do because Tom doesn't have any personality of his own. About halfway down, Louisa is described very differently. We're told that there was a light with nothing to rest upon in Louisa, a fire with nothing to burn, a starved imagination keeping life in itself somehow. And that fire symbol goes throughout Hard Times. We're constantly reminded of fire. Louisa looks into the fire. And the idea is basically that the fire is her personality, the fire is her passion and her life, and it's just got nothing to rest upon. And we're told later on that fire breaks out, and there's that idea that this breakdown is set up here because Louisa isn't just a machine and she has been destroyed and downtrodden by this system. We're told about 3/4 of the way down the page, I brought him father, said Louisa quickly. So again, she's the one with the personality, she's the one in control. Tom is just this object or machine. Gradgrind's horrified and he says about 3 lines from the bottom of page 17, in this degraded position. So just like in Atonement, class and appearance is very, very important in this society. This is partly about class. Gradgrind sees that, you know, the higher class position and the better position to be in and the more respectable position is to be basing everything on fact. Just like with the Tallis is how, you know, it's very easy to blame Robbie because he's lower born. And then at the top of page 18, Louisa says that she's tired. Gradgrind says, tired of what? She says, I don't know of what, of everything, I think. And he says, say not another word. Now what we get there symbolically obviously is Louisa, you know, again having that fire with nothing to rest upon. But symbolically also it's the silencing of women. Louisa has been silenced by this system, by this very patriarchal system. Just like she's silenced when Bounderby, you know, wants to get married to her. This is a society that silences women. And when Mrs. Gradgrind is described in the next chapter, we see the same thing happening. That this is a society that routinely silences and takes any voice and takes any personality away from women, and we get Dickens really hinting at that on page 18. Chapter 4, we get Mr. Bounderby described, and one of the first things we're told about halfway down page 19 is that we get the impression of him being inflated like a balloon. So on the one hand that shows his pompous nature, but also the idea is that balloons pop. And Bounderby is set up to be like this balloon, slowly inflating so that eventually he can pop it and he can bring him down, because Bounderby represents everything bad about utilitarianism to Dickens. He's worse than Gradgrind because he's a hypocrite, and you know there's that real pleasure in watching him pop at the end when it all ends up being lies. We're told towards the bottom of page 19 that he stood before the fire, partly because it was a cool spring afternoon. Okay, so again he's by the fire, literally blocking it out. And we're also told Mr Bounderby delivered some observations to Mrs Gradgrind. So again, Bounderby's delivering them. Mrs Gradgrind is just this passive recipient. She's a woman who isn't given a voice, who isn't really given a personality. We're told on page 20, about 3 lines down, she's in a little thin white pink-eyed bundle of shawls. She's not even a person, she's just a bundle of shawls. There's nothing to her. All those list of adjectives emphasise the fact that she's a silenced woman with no sort of voice and no personality. And that continues when she, halfway down page 20, she faintly looked at the tongs as the most appropriate thing her imbecility could think of doing. She's a woman who's just completely passive, just looking around, has no real function. We're told towards the bottom of page 20, weakly smiling and giving no other sign of vitality, looked, as she always did, like an indifferently executed transparency of a small female figure without enough light behind it. So again, there's that mention of light and fire and burning, the idea that Mrs Gradgrind is what happens when that fire goes out. She's just staring around, and as she always did, reminds us that this is just a routine. This is what this society does to women and treats it as just normal and everyday. On page 21, Bounderby gives his history. Now again, Dickens is really attacking this. Okay, Bounderby says that he rose from poverty, he was treated badly, but through hard work and perseverance and looking out for himself, he succeeded. That's utilitarianism in a nutshell, and Dickens hates it. And Dickens sort of attacks this. It's the same thing as he does in Oliver Twist, this idea of Mr Bumble and these characters who think that the children, need to have life harder to build their characters. On page 21, he keeps referring to himself as Josiah Bounderby, so he seems very pompous, he seems very distant from us, we can't really relate to him. And Dickens is making the point that this story is deliberately hyperbolic, this story is ridiculous, and we're not to believe it, we're not to trust it. Mrs Gradgrind says to the children, to Louise Ashes, go and be something illogical directly, about halfway down page 22. Dickens' point again about all these ologies, we've had a list of them earlier on in chapter 2. The point that all these subjects and all these facts are meaningless to Dickens, they're just ologies. And coming out of Mrs Gradgrind's mouth, that really shows it. She doesn't understand any of them. She doesn't have any appreciation. It's just all illogical, okay? It's that idea of just facts being everything in this world. And towards the bottom of page 22, we're told nobody listens to her, so she once more died away and nobody minded her. So again, Mrs Gradgrind is this silenced, pathetic figure who is ignored, who is silenced by this society. On to page 24, we're told towards the bottom of the names of the other Gradgrind children. Right towards the bottom, we're told that they're called Adam Smith and Malthus. So they've got Louisa, Tom, Jane, Adam Smith and Malthus. Adam Smith and Malthus were the names of two utilitarianist thinkers. So again, these children don't even have an individual identity. Dickens is using this family to represent the wider problems in society. And these two children don't even have individual identities or individual names. They are just representations of the system and of what the system does to people. And then right at the end of the chapter, page 25, Bounderby kisses Louisa and she sort of rubs her face really hard. And Tom, says, what are you doing, basically? And she says right at the end, you may cut the piece out with your penknife if you like, Tom. I wouldn't cry. It's a very melodramatic response, but I think Dickens does that deliberately. Making the point, basically, that Louisa has got this fire, that it hasn't got anything to burn upon, anything to sort of focus on. And so, therefore, this melodramatic side is sort of coming out at times. And that foreshadows, the fall down at her father's feet, this extreme passion, this extreme hatred towards Mr Bounderby, and that self-destructive nature, that this is what it's doing to women. The only sort of, way that Louisa can voice herself is this mention of, hurting herself almost in the same way that Mrs Gradgrind only sort of gets any kind of a personality right as she dies, and she starts to scrawl things that don't make any sense on the bed sheets. Okay, so this is a society where women are silenced, where women aren't given a voice or a personality, and the only way that they can reject or do anything is through, their own destruction, their own death, and their own harm. And that, I think, is what's really important about chapter 3 and chapter 4 of Hard Times.